A lonely mountain man, cursed with childlessness, finds his world turned upside down when a desperate woman appears at his cabin door, carrying 5 newborn boys. She says they're his, but he's barren. As snow beats against the mountains, whispers rise in town. Some call her a liar, others say it's a miracle. The man doesn't know what to believe, until strange coincidences begin to unfold. Each child bears a mark only he could recognize, something from his past he thought buried forever. Now, faith, doubt, and destiny collide in the frozen wilderness. The preacher says no miracle comes without a price, and someone's coming up the trail to claim those boys. Are they heaven's gift, or someone's cruel trick? And when truth finally breaks through the storm, will it save their souls or destroy them all? Drop a comment below and share which part of the world you're tuning in from today. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more. The wind had a mean edge that morning, sharp enough to cut through wool and skin alike. Snow drifted down from the gray Colorado sky, whispering against the pines and burying the last sign of game trails. Jackson Turner pulled his fur collar up higher and steadied his rifle. He had been hunting since dawn, tracking faint hoofprints that led nowhere. His breath hung in the frozen air like smoke from a dying fire. For months he had spoken to no one but the mountains and his mule, Jasper. He didn't mind silence. It had become a friend of sorts, steady, honest, and cruel only when a man started remembering too much. Jackson had buried his wife, Hannah, 2 winters before, up on the ridge behind their cabin. Fever had taken her quick, leaving him with a wooden cross and a hollowness that never filled. Since then, he'd stayed high in the hills, trapping, trading furs when needed, and keeping his heart locked tight. Snow deepened under his boots. He paused at a creek frozen solid and knelt beside it. The ice was thick, white beneath the surface. He chipped some away with his knife, letting the mule drink where water seeped up. His fingers burned from the cold, but he didn't care much. Pain was proof a man was still alive. A hawk cried overhead, cutting through the silence. Jackson looked up. The sky had that low, heavy color that warned of another storm. He frowned. "Best head back, boy," he told the mule, his voice rough from disuse. "Ain't no meat worth dying in a whiteout." They turned toward home, following the ridge line, but something caught his eye near the tree line below. A shape half buried in the snow. At first he thought it was a deer carcass. He squinted, wiped the snow from his beard, and took a step closer. The shape didn't look right. Too square at one end, too still at the other. It wasn't an animal. It was a wagon. Jackson cursed under his breath. No tracks led away from it, only the ghost of old wheel ruts. Snow had swallowed the trail, days ago. He approached slowly, rifle ready in case of scavengers or desperate men. The wagon's canvas cover sagged under ice, torn open on one side. He pulled it back, expecting nothing but frozen supplies or a dead horse. Instead, a small cry came from inside. Jackson froze. It wasn't a child. It was a woman's voice, weak and trembling. "Help, please," it whispered, so faint he almost thought he'd imagined it. He shoved more snow aside and looked inside. A woman lay curled beneath a blanket, her face pale as frost. Her hands clutched a small, leather-bound Bible. She looked half-frozen, her lips cracked and blue. Jackson dropped to his knees. "Ma'am," he said gruffly, shaking her shoulder. "You alive?" Her eyelids fluttered. "Please, don't leave me." He didn't waste another second. "You ain't dying out here." He lifted her, surprised at her weight. She was sturdy, soft, not frail like most he'd seen come west. She moaned faintly, but didn't resist. Jackson wrapped her in his buffalo coat, then threw what he could salvage from the wagon, a small satchel, the Bible, and a quilt, onto Jasper's back. The wind picked up, screaming through the trees. Snow thickened until he could hardly see his own boots. He tightened his grip on the woman and pressed forward, one slow step at a time, toward the dark smudge of timber that marked the valley of his cabin. Each step burned through his legs. The weight in his arms grew heavier, but he wouldn't stop. He thought of Hannah's last breath, how he'd failed to reach the doctor in time, and the shame that still haunted him. Not this time. Not again. By the time he reached the cabin, his beard was crusted with ice, and the woman's body was limp against his chest. He kicked the door open with his boot, stumbled inside, and set her near the fire pit. The air inside was cold, but still. He threw down his rifle, yanked off his gloves, and worked to light the fire. Sparks caught on the birch bark, then flames licked up through dry pine sticks. Warmth filled the room in slow breaths. Jackson unwrapped the coat from around her and laid her near the hearth. Her dress was stiff with frost. He hesitated only a moment before cutting away the outer layer to free her from the ice. She wasn't young, maybe late 20s, with round cheeks and soft curls matted to her forehead. Her face was kind, even in suffering. "Come on, lady," he muttered. "Stay with me." He poured a bit of whiskey between her lips. She coughed weakly, and her eyes flickered open. For a heartbeat, she stared at him in confusion. "Where?" "Am I?" "Safe," Jackson said. "You're in my cabin. Storm's blowing bad outside. You'll stay here till it clears." She blinked slowly, tears freezing at the corners of her eyes. "Thank you, sir." "Don't talk. Rest." He pulled more blankets over her and stirred the fire higher. Then he sat back, rubbing his hands together, staring at the stranger who'd fallen from heaven, or maybe from some other kind of plan he didn't yet understand. Hours passed. Night came fast in the mountains. The wind howled like a choir of ghosts around the cabin, but inside, warmth spread. The woman's breathing grew steadier. Jackson made broth from dried venison and water, feeding her with a spoon when she stirred. "My name's Jackson Turner," he said quietly when her eyes met his again. "Ain't much of a talker, but you ought to know whose roof you're under." She nodded faintly. "I'm Amelia," she whispered. "Amelia Hensley." He tipped his hat slightly. "Well, Miss Hensley, reckon we'll keep you from freezing to death, long as you don't mind mountain stew and bad company?" That earned him the faintest smile, a small curve of the lips that somehow warmed the room more than the fire. By morning, the storm had worsened. Snow piled against the cabin walls, sealing the door nearly shut. Jackson woke to the crack of timbers shifting under weight. He stirred the fire and checked on Amelia. She was asleep, breathing easy, her cheeks no longer gray. A good sign. He brewed coffee thick as tar and took a sip. Outside, the wind screamed, but inside there was peace. An uneasy one, maybe, but it filled a space that had been empty too long. Amelia stirred mid-morning. Jackson handed her a tin cup of warm broth. She sipped slowly, her hands trembling. "I thought I'd die out there," she murmured. "You almost did." Her gaze fell to the Bible resting beside her blanket. "I was traveling west. The wagon train left me when I got sick. I prayed someone would come before the snow did." Jackson nodded, jaw tight. "You're lucky I went hunting today. Don't much take to company, but I couldn't leave you for the wolves." "Then God answered," she whispered, voice cracking. Jackson looked away. He wasn't sure about God anymore. "Maybe so." The rest of the day passed in a quiet rhythm. He chopped wood, mended a boot, and checked his rifle. Amelia watched him, her eyes following his every motion like she was trying to understand the kind of man who lived alone in a world this cold. She offered to help, but he waved her off. "Rest first," he said. "You'll earn your keep soon enough." That evening, as he roasted rabbit over the fire, Emilia asked softly, "You live out here alone?" "Been that way a while," he replied, "since my wife passed." "I'm sorry," she said and meant it. He gave a small nod. "Storm took her quick. After that, I reckon the hills were quieter than people." Emilia looked towards the fire. Silence can be cruel company. He met her gaze across the flicker of flames. That it can. When they ate, she said grace in a trembling voice, thanking the Lord for warmth and rescue. Jackson didn't bow his head, but something stirred inside him all the same. Something he hadn't felt since. Hannah's voice echoed through this same room. After supper, Emilia hummed softly, a hymn he half remembered from church in town. Her voice was low, full, carrying through the cabin like a promise. Jackson sat back in his chair, eyes closed, listening until the tune faded into the crackle of the fire. The storm eased sometime before dawn. He woke to stillness. Outside, the snow had settled deep and white, covering every scar of the world. Inside, a new sound broke the quiet, Emilia humming again as she stirred the pot over the fire. Jackson sat up, rubbing his eyes. "You shouldn't be up." "I'm steady now," she said, smiling shyly. "And I thought I'd make breakfast. Least I can do." The smell of cornmeal and coffee filled the cabin. Jackson chuckled under his breath, surprised at how right it felt. He hadn't tasted a woman's cooking in years. It felt human again. When they ate, she told him more about her journey, the promise of marriage that turned to disappointment, the escort that abandoned her after she fell ill, the fear of dying alone in the snow. Jackson listened without judgment. When she finished, he said, "Reckon you've had a hard run, Miss Hensley, but you're safe here till spring." She nodded, tears glinting in her eyes. "Thank you. You're a good man, Mr. Turner." He looked away, uncomfortable. "Don't know about good. Just couldn't leave you out there." That night, when the fire burned low, Jackson stepped outside. The stars were bright over the ridge, sharp as needles in the cold. He looked toward the rise where Hannah's grave lay buried under snow. "I don't know what you're doing, Lord," he whispered, breath fogging the air. "But if you sent her here, reckon I'll do right by her." He stood a long while, listening to the soft hiss of the wind through pine needles, then went back inside. Emilia slept peacefully, her Bible resting on her chest. He sat in the chair beside the fire, watching her breathe. For the first time in 2 years, the cabin didn't feel haunted. It felt alive. Morning came pale and shy, like a child at a doorway. Cold light slipped through the chinks in the shutters and laid thin silver on the floorboards. The cabin smelled of smoke, rabbit bones, and wet wool drying on pegs. Jackson woke stiff in his chair, boots still on, blanket thrown across his lap. His neck ached. He listened first, the way men who lived alone learned to do. Listened for trouble, for changes, for anything that did not belong. He heard only the low murmur of a steady fire and the soft, even breathing of the woman on the cot. Emilia lay on her side, wrapped in his best quilt, the blue one Hannah had pieced from old shirts. Her hand rested on the worn Bible as if it were a small, warm animal she had rescued. Color had returned to her cheeks. Frostbite whitened a few fingertips, but the angry blue had faded during the night. Outside, the world held its breath after the blizzard. No wind, no groan of trees, only a depth of stillness that made every small sound ring. Jackson stood, joints complaining, and eased more wood into the mouth of the stove. When the fire caught, it made a sound like someone sighing out thanks. He put on coffee, thick and black, then set snow in a pot to melt for washing. He shaved at the basin with a short, careful hand, not out of vanity but because long winters taught a man that small order kept back large sorrow. He remembered the way Hannah used to laugh when he nicked himself and dab him with a rag and say, "You'll live, my brave bear." The memory passed like a bird shadow and was gone. Amelia stirred. At first she did not open her eyes. She held still, as if testing whether the warmth would vanish if she moved too fast. Then she blinked and focused on the rafters, on smoke stains, on the shelf with its row of tin cups, on Jackson watching from beside the stove, hands wrapped around a steaming mug. "Good morning," he said. His voice came out rough. "You slept fair." She tried to sit and winced. He set his mug down at once and stepped to the cot. "Easy there." I'm better," she whispered. Her voice held a rasp of cold and fear worn thin. "Where are we?" "My place," he answered. "High Valley above Silver Bluff. You're safe. Storm's done for now." She took this in, not arguing, just letting it settle into her. "Thank you," she said, and her eyes filled without spilling, the way strong people cry. He pulled a stool beside the cot. "Let me see your hands." She gave them without fuss. He studied the fingertips, pressed gently until color returned slow under the skin. "You'll keep them," he said. "Numb for a while, but you'll keep them." "God is merciful," she breathed. He nodded but said nothing to that. He set a tin bowl on the stool and poured warm water over a clean rag. "Gonna clean the frost burn and rub lard in. It'll sting." She bit her lip. "Go on." He worked with the steady patience of a man who had stitched his own leg once, and his mule more than once. He did not stare at her face, though it was kind. He kept his eyes on his hands, on the simple job of saving skin. When he finished, he wrapped her fingertips in strips cut from one of his old shirts. "Much obliged," she whispered. "I can use my hands if you show me how to help." "Help later," he said. "Eat first." He offered a cup of coffee with a splash of condensed milk he saved for winter sickness, and a plate with a heel of bread warmed on the stove. She ate like someone who had learned not to take a next bite for granted, praising each swallow under her breath. When the coffee had taken the chill from her bones, he asked, "You remember much after the wagon?" She nodded, eyes on the Bible. "I remember the cold eating me, as if it had teeth. Then I remember a voice, yours, and the smell of smoke. I thought I'd passed to glory and found a hearth instead." A shy smile. "I reckon that makes you the angel at the door." Jackson snorted softly. "Ain't never been called that." He looked towards the door where his snow-crusted coat hung. "I found your wagon off the creek bend. No tracks. Found your Bible and this besides." He reached into his coat pocket and drew out the small locket he had tucked there the night before, polishing it clean with his thumb. Her hand flew to her throat and stopped at the edge of the quilt. "My father's," she said. "I thought I lost it to the snow." "You didn't." He placed it in her palm. The engraved initials caught firelight. She closed her fingers around it and shut her eyes, her lips moving as if she thanked someone standing just out of sight. They let quiet sit with them, not awkward, but real. Jackson rose and moved through chores, water from the snow pot to the basin. Ashes swept, kindling split to toothpicks for the next lighting. He had the sense of being watched and did not mind it. Alone, men forgot how good it felt to be seen doing honest, simple work. When he finished, she said, "I will tell you my name proper. Amelia Hensley, late of Kansas. I came west to meet a husband at Fort Gunnison. I worked as trail cook for the escort party to pay my way. Then I took fever. They promised to come back for me when I could stand. They never did. He said, not trusting his temper with words. You're from farm folks? Corn, sorghum, milk cow, that kicked, she said, and it was the first light note he heard in her voice. I sewed for neighbors, cooked at church socials. I know how to keep a home and keep people fed. I ain't fast with a gun or pretty with a piano, but I can make a room feel like it belongs to somebody. He felt that sentence in his chest. A useful gift, he said. She glanced around the cabin. It was clean but bare, built for need and grief. Her eyes softened. If you'll allow me, I can tidy a bit. Air out blankets, mend where needed. I won't touch what you don't want touched. He hesitated. The room had sat exactly as he wanted it, so his heart would not stumble over memories. But the past 2 days had proved that death should not be the loudest thing in a house. He nodded once. We'll set some rules. You rest today. You can stand a little this afternoon if the numbness don't worsen. Tomorrow, if weather holds, we'll fetch water from the creek and see to the snares. One small job at a time. Yes, sir, she said. There was no mockery in it, only respect and relief at being guided by someone who kept his word. He looked at her straight. You're Miss Hensley here, and safe. I keep my distance. You keep yours. Folks in these hills wag tongues if they find reason. I got no mind to give them any. Her chin lifted, strong and modest both. I understand. You're a gentleman. I am grateful. He busied himself to hide the small tide of warmth that rose at her words. Outside, a pocket of snow slid from the roof with a soft whomp. The sound settled his mind. He went to the door, lifted the bar, and pushed. It gave, but only a foot. Snow had drifted high in the night and pressed like a second wall. He took the shovel and began to bite a tunnel from the door to daylight. He worked in steady strokes, breath pluming, arms burning with an ache that felt good, true, honest. The cold bit his face and reminded him he was alive and doing good work. When the trench stood chest high and the path reached open light, he paused and looked across the white valley. The pine tops wore piles of snow like sleeping hats. The sky stretched polished blue, so clean it made his eyes water. No smoke trails, no riders, no sign of anyone but the small lives of rabbit and jay and fox. He stood a minute longer, listening. The world had that hushed, holy sound that came after storms. He found himself whispering without meaning to. Thank you. He was not sure who he spoke to. Habit, maybe. Or hope. Inside, he stomped snow from his boots and set the shovel by the door. Amelia had that stubborn look he was beginning to recognize, the one that meant she'd decided to do something, and was asking permission with her eyes, only because she was polite. She had pushed the quilt aside and sat straighter, feet on the floorboards, toes wrapped in rags. You ought to lay back, he said. I ought to move a little, she answered, mild as milk. My legs will forget how, if I don't remind them. May I use your arm for balance? He offered it without complaint. She stood, testing weight. Her knees trembled but held. He felt how solid she was, womanly, not delicate, and it steadied him in a way he did not expect. They took 3 small steps. She breathed slow, counting under her breath. Then they sat again. The whole thing took 1 minute and left them both smiling like they had climbed a mountain. That's enough for now, he said. Yes, she said, panting a little. But it felt good to stand. He made midday stew from the rabbit bones and barley. The smell filled the cabin with comfort. He crumbled in dried sage and thought of Hannah's hand on his wrist, teasing him for using a heavy pinch instead of a light one. He carried the bowls to the table and helped Amelia sit on the bench. They ate in careful silence, each mouthful like a bridge laid between them. When the bowls were empty, Amelia cleared her throat. "Mr. Turner, I must say a thing I would not say if I had any other choice." He waited. "When I am fully well, I should not remain here past what is decent. I know how tongues wag, as you said. If weather allows, I will go on to the fort and send word to the escort leader who left me." A pause. "But if you permit me to stay until the road opens, I will earn it with work. I will not be a burden." He nodded. He liked plain talk. "You'll stay till I judge the trail safe. That may be days, might be a week or two. Winter makes its own laws. While you're under this roof, you're under my protection." She looked down at the locket. "That is a mercy." His jaw hardened a notch. "It's not mercy, it's right." Afternoon slanted through the shutters. He set Amelia to a small task, sorting the good kindling from the punk wood in a wooden crate beside the stove. No splinters with those bandaged fingers. He checked the traps he kept hung inside to dry, chose 3 to set when the sun softened the snow, and poured shot into cartridges at the table. The sound, tap, pour, crimp, was its own kind of prayer. He caught Amelia watching the work with interest, not fear. "You ever lived out rough?" he asked. She smiled a little. "I don't scare easy. Storms come, storms go. A woman learns to do what's needed with what she has. Folks sometimes think a big woman cannot be quick or brave. They are wrong." "I don't reckon you're afraid of much," he said. It came out as respect, and she heard it. Toward late afternoon, he wrapped her feet better, buttoned her coat, and showed her how to step into his snow moccasins. They went out the short tunnel he'd dug. The cold bit keen, but the sun on snow turned the valley to a field of diamonds. He led her only as far as the shed, where he kept a small ladder of dried herbs and a crate of potatoes against the far wall, packed in sawdust. "Breathe slow," he said. "Let the cold in a little at a time. Your lungs will take it better." She nodded, following his rhythm. In the shed, she touched the herbs with a small sound of pleasure. "Mint, pennyroyal, yarrow. You know their uses?" "My mother taught me," she said. "Mint for stomach, yarrow for bleeding, pennyroyal to keep pests away." He watched her fingers move over the bundles, the way she honored each thing. Some folks grabbed from the world and gave nothing back. Amelia looked like a person who spoke thank you to small things because she knew life leaned on them. They went back inside before the cold could bite too deep. The sky darkened slow. He stoked the fire, and lamplight lit the brass on the rifle and the buckle of her locket. Evening settled like a quilt over 2 people who had earned rest. After supper, plain potatoes with sage and a small wedge of jerky for salt. Amelia asked, "May I read something?" "Go on." She opened the Bible where a ribbon kept place. Her voice was gentle, low, without performance. "He maketh the storm a calm, so that the waves thereof are still. Then are they glad because they be quiet. So he bringeth them unto their desired haven." She closed the book and looked at the fire. "I like that part. It feels true." He sat with elbows on knees and stared at the flames. "I used to read," he said after a time, "most evenings. Then I stopped." "Because it hurt?" He didn't answer. He didn't need to. She was not prying. She was naming the shape of his silence and letting it be. When night had thickened to velvet, he spread his bedroll by the door as he had the night before. "You take the cot," he said. "I keep watch." "You'll freeze on the floor," she protested. "I've slept colder." She was quiet for a breath. "Then let me do one thing before I sleep." She slid off the cot to her knees, careful with her bandaged toes, and folded her hands. She did not ask him to join. She did not make a speech. She said, "Thank you for warmth. Thank you for food. Thank you for a roof. Bless this house and the man who keeps it decent. Bless the souls who left me behind. Teach me not to hate. Amen." He looked down at his hands, big and scarred, and not as clean as prayer hands ought to be. Then he lay on the floor and watched the fire burn low. He listened to the small sounds of another person breathing in his house and felt how it changed the size of the room, as if the walls had pushed out and the roof had climbed a foot higher. Sometime after midnight, he woke from a shallow doze to the sound of Amelia turning on the cot. She sat up, breath catching, as if chased by a bad dream. He kept still, eyes half closed, and waited. She pressed her hand to the locket, breathed slow, then lay back. He heard her whisper one word, "Please," to no one he could see. He slept again, deeper. Dawn pawed at the shutters. The second day promised clear weather. Jackson rose first, fed the stove, and put coffee on. Amelia woke to the smell and to the clink of tin on iron. She sat up, tested her feet, and stood without shaking. "How do you feel?" he asked. "Like I belong to my body again," she said. "Good. Today, little things. You sit in the sun by the window and mend if you can. I'll check snares down valley before noon. Won't be gone long." She looked toward the door, then back at him. "I won't be afraid here alone." "You won't be alone long," he said. He hesitated, then added a truth he did not plan to give. "I'll be thinking of that stove and whether you've enough wood in reach. That's as close as I come to worry." A small laugh warmed the rim of her coffee cup. "I'll keep the fire fed. Go do what hunters do." He set the coffee pot back and buckled on his belt. "If trouble comes, bar the door. Rifles there. Half cock only. You ever fire one?" "Once," she said. "Didn't like it." "You ain't got to. Just keep it near. Noise alone turns most wolves, four-legged and two." Her gaze sharpened, catching what he did not say plain. "I understand." He pulled on his coat, hat, and mitts. At the door he paused, one hand on the latch. The air held that clean after-storm smell, like cold iron and pine needles. He looked back. Amelia stood in lamplight with the quilt around her shoulders and the locket bright like a small dawn. She lifted her chin and smiled a little. "Come back soon," she said. He nodded. "I will." He stepped into the new day, snow squeaking under his boots, breath rising like signal smoke. The mountains shone hard and beautiful. He started down the path he'd shoveled, then cut left toward the alder thicket where snares waited under their white caps. Jays called sharp. A fox ghosted across the slope and vanished into shadow. The world felt like a held note. At the first snare, a rabbit lay still, already frozen stiff. He loosened the wire, spoke a low thanks, and tucked the animal into his sack. Work went smooth. No tracks but his own and small lives. He checked 3 more snares, reset 2, and turned back before sun climbed to full. He had been gone less than an hour. As he topped the rise that gave sight of the cabin, he slowed. Something had changed in the yard. Not danger, no strange tracks, no broken door, just changed. He came closer and saw a line of wet footprints from the shed to the house, small, careful steps. Smoke rolled steady from the chimney, and on the split rail near the door, a quilt lay airing in the sun. Hannah's blue quilt, bright as river water against the snow. He stopped at the gate, hand on the post, and swallowed. The wind moved the quilt like a living thing, the small triangles catching light, each stitch a woman's evening, a memory sewn to a memory. The sight did not hurt him as he feared it would. It felt instead like a kind hand on his back, urging him the last few steps home. He lifted the latch and went in. Emilia sat by the window in the square of sun, needle flashing as she mended a tear in a wool sock. A kettle sang soft. Clean kindling sat stacked in a neat row by the stove, and the floor showed fresh sweep marks, straight and firm, his broom leaning beside the door like it was proud of itself. "You were quick," she said. He hung his hat on its nail and held up the rabbits. "We'll eat fine." Her eyes crinkled with real pleasure. "I set the blue for air. I hope that was right. It had the smell of old grief. Sun chases that kind of smell away." "It was right," he said. The words surprised them both. He skinned the rabbits at the table, his knife sure and swift, the motions sweet with practice. She watched, stitching, not flinching from the small blood, not turning it to drama. When he finished, she rose and came to the stove. "May I try the pot?" she asked. "You can," he said. "I ain't fussy, but I'm particular." She laughed at that. "I'll be careful and bold at once then." She browned meat in a little lard, added water, barley, onions from his hanging plait, and a pinch of herbs. The smell filled the room with a promise of noon. Jackson cleaned his knife and set it aside. He wiped the table and set out 2 tin bowls and 2 spoons that did not match. It looked like a feast prepared for 2 who had not planned to be 2. Before they ate, Emilia bowed her head. Jackson found himself doing the same without meaning to. Her prayer was simple as bread. "Thank you for today. Thank you for work. Thank you for this man's kindness. Keep us honest. Keep us safe. Amen." They ate, and the stew tasted better than his had the night before, though he'd used the same pot and the same meat. Maybe it was the onion. Maybe it was the prayer. Maybe it was the simple fact of 2 people sharing the work of staying alive. When the bowls were clean, Jackson said, "We'll take an hour of rest, then I'll cut wood. You can read or mend. Later we'll bring the blue quilt in before the damp returns." "Yes," she said. The hour passed easy. He checked traps again in his mind, planned the next day's route, weighed the snow on the ridge above the creek. She mended and hummed a tune that walked along inside a person and cleared out hard corners. The sun traveled from one slat of the shutter to the next. The cabin held. Near evening, they fetched Hannah's quilt and spread it back over the cot. Emilia smoothed the edges with slow hands. "She had good stitches," she said softly. "Strong and even. She was loved here." "Yes," he said, the word a prayer and a memory both. As dusk came, they ate the last of the stew and a slice of bread she had warmed on the stove, rubbed with a little lard and salt. Outside, the sky went from blue to rose to iron. Coyotes sang far off, not hungry, just alive. Jackson set the bar on the door and checked the rifle by habit. Emilia folded her mending and tucked the Bible under the pillow. They sat for a time in easy quiet, watching the flames climb and fold down like a chest breathing. "Today felt like a beginning," she said. He thought of the aired quilt, the sun on her hair, the path he had shoveled and then walked twice, out and back. He thought of how his cabin no longer sounded hollow when he moved. "It did," he answered. She stood and went to her knees again for a short prayer. He stayed seated, but his heart stood beside her. When she climbed into the cot, he pulled his bedroll to the door again and lay down with his hands behind his head. The last thing he saw before sleep found him was the blue quilt rising and falling with her breath, and the lamplight making the locket glow like a firefly at her throat. Morning would bring small work and more trust. For now, the house kept them. The night kept the valley. And for the first time in a long time, Jackson Turner did not mind closing his eyes. The sun climbed late that morning, shy behind thin gray clouds. Inside the cabin, warmth from the stove lingered like a living thing. Jackson was already awake, seated by the table sharpening his knife on the whetstone, slow, steady strokes echoing against the walls. He worked by habit, not need. The blade was already sharp enough to shave bark. But work gave a man something to hold his thoughts still. Amelia stirred beneath Hannah's quilt, blinking against the light that came through the cracks. She stretched carefully, mindful of her bandaged fingers. When she sat up, she caught the smell of something baking. Cornbread, faint and sweet. On the stove, a small iron skillet hissed with butter melting at its edges. Jackson had risen before dawn again. She smiled. "You're always up before the day's ready," she said softly. He looked over his shoulder. Knife paused mid-stroke. "Can't sleep long when the world's quiet. Makes my head too loud." Amelia nodded. "I know that kind of quiet." She drew the blanket around her shoulders and joined him at the table. He'd already poured 2 cups of coffee, black as soot but strong enough to wake any living soul. They ate in silence for a while. Jackson watched her carefully spread a bit of lard over the cornbread, her movements patient, practiced. When she finally took a bite, her eyes brightened. "This is fine bread," she said. He shrugged. "Was Hannah's recipe. Guess I remembered right." Amelia smiled faintly, sensing the weight in his voice. "She must have been a good woman." "She was," he said. "Kind. Didn't belong in a world this rough. Still, she tried." Outside, a single crow called from a pine. Jackson rose, pulled on his coat and said, "Gonna check the traps before the snow crust's too hard. Won't be long." Amelia nodded. "I'll keep the fire going." He stepped out into the cold. The world had settled after the storm. Snow smooth as cream, the air so clear it rang. He walked toward the ridge where his snares lay hidden among alder thickets. Rabbit prints dotted the snow. The sun cast pale gold over the frozen creek. The land was quiet but alive, and for the first time in months, Jackson didn't feel entirely alone in it. Back in the cabin, Amelia set to work. She gathered wood from the stack near the door, sweeping the floor with the straw broom and humming a hymn under her breath. Each stroke of the broom lifted dust and sadness both. She found a cracked tin cup, soldered the seam with a bit of pitch from Jackson's repair box, then hung the quilt from the rafters to air out the mustiness. Every small act of care brought warmth back into the place. She stopped at the shelf beside the door. A single photograph sat there, a tintype of a woman with dark hair and soft eyes. Hannah. Amelia picked it up gently, brushing the dust away. The woman in the picture smiled faintly, as if she'd known how much this cabin would need love even after she was gone. Amelia whispered, "He misses you still." When Jackson returned, his boots were soaked through, but his bag was full. "Caught 3, he said, dropping the rabbits on the table. "That'll keep us in meat for a bit." Amelia looked up from the stove where she was heating water. "You've been blessed with luck today." He nodded and began skinning the first rabbit, laying the pelts neatly aside. She watched him work with practiced hands, each cut clean, each motion purposeful. "You've done this a long time," she said. "Since I could hold a knife," he replied. "My pa trapped the rivers back east. Learned early how to live off the land. Guess I never learned how to do much else." She stirred the pot of water, adding a handful of salt. "There's honor in honest work. A man could do worse." Jackson gave a soft chuckle. "You talk like a preacher's daughter." "My father wasn't a preacher," Amelia said, smiling. He was a farmer, but Mama said faith ought to sound like plain talk if it's true. That so? He asked, half smiling. Then she was a wise woman. As the day passed, the two moved easily around each other. Jackson chopped wood behind the cabin while Amelia kneaded dough for supper biscuits. When he came in, cheeks flushed from the cold, she handed him a tin cup of coffee. Much obliged, he said, blowing on the rim. You'll be hungry soon, she replied. Biscuits don't rise faster for staring at them. He laughed then, a deep sound that filled the room. It startled them both, how good it felt. By evening they sat across from each other again, sharing supper, biscuits, stew, and a bit of laughter. The wind outside had gentled into whispers, and for once it didn't sound lonely. Afterward, Jackson leaned back, pipe between his fingers though he didn't light it. You keep busy, he said. Ain't many could fill a day so full. Amelia looked toward the fire. It helps, keeps the dark thoughts out. He nodded. I know that feeling. Silence fell, comfortable as a quilt. Then she asked softly, You said you don't take to company much. Why'd you save me? He looked up, eyes steady on hers. Didn't reckon it was a choice. A person left to die in snow. Well, a man's got to answer for that before God. Her gaze softened. Maybe he sent you. Jackson rubbed the back of his neck. Maybe he sent you. Neither spoke for a long time after that. Outside, the snow began again, light as dust. Inside, the fire burned bright, the room filled with warmth, and something new that neither of them named yet. When night came, Jackson set another log on the fire. You best rest. Tomorrow I'll head toward the ridge, see if I can find more traps or game. You keep to the fire. Amelia nodded, pulling the quilt up to her chin. I will. He settled into his bedroll near the door. The firelight flickered on the walls, painting shadows that moved like memories. As his eyes grew heavy, he heard her whisper a small prayer. Lord, she said, thank you for the man who still has mercy in him. Jackson didn't move, but he felt the words settle in his chest. For the first time in a long while, his dreams were peaceful. The next 3 days passed in a quiet rhythm that felt almost like peace. Jackson and Amelia worked side by side, she inside the cabin, he out in the cold. The storm clouds had broken, and a pale sun glittered off the snowfields, bright enough to hurt a man's eyes. Each morning, Jackson checked traps, hauled water, and split logs. Amelia kept the hearth warm, baked bread from what was left of the flour, and patched his old shirts with tiny, neat stitches. It was a small life, but it breathed again. On the 4th morning, Jackson woke before dawn, as usual. The fire was down to embers, but the room was warm from the thick quilt Amelia had tucked around him while he slept. He smiled to himself, stirred the fire back to life, and stepped outside to breathe the cold air. The sky was streaked pink and gray. A jay called from the pines. For a brief moment, he could almost believe the world was kind again. Then he saw them. Boot tracks, fresh ones. They cut across the frozen crust near the lower ridge, 2 sets of hoof prints and 1 of boots, leading from the east and stopping within sight of his cabin. Jackson crouched, touching the edges, still sharp, maybe made in the night. He scanned the valley. No smoke, no movement, only still trees. Whoever had come this way hadn't gone far. He rose slowly, hand brushing the butt of his rifle. So, he muttered under his breath, we ain't alone after all. When he returned to the cabin, Amelia was up, stirring a pot of coffee on the stove. You're quiet this morning, she said, glancing over her shoulder. Something wrong? Jackson took his hat off and hung it on the peg. Found sign of riders near the ridge, 3, maybe less. Passed close in the night. Her hand paused over the spoon. Riders? Out here? Could be trappers. Could be soldiers from the fort, he said, but his tone carried doubt. Could be someone looking for you. Emilia's face paled. For me? No one would... She stopped, clutching her locket. Unless... Jackson studied her expression. You said your party left you. Who led it? A man named Silas Vane, she said softly. He was supposed to be my intended. Jackson frowned. The same man who left you for dead? She nodded, shame clouding her eyes. He said he'd return once I was stronger, but he didn't mean it. He wanted something from me I couldn't give. When I refused, he called me a burden. Jackson's jaw tightened. And he'd have reason to come looking for you now? Her eyes flickered toward the Bible. Only if he meant to finish what he started. Jackson turned to the window. Snow glittered under the light like glass shards. He kept his voice even. Then we'll keep watch. You'll stay inside when I'm gone. Keep the door barred, rifle loaded. She nodded silently, the fear plain but held firm. I won't be helpless, Mr. Turner. He met her gaze, impressed by the quiet steel there. Didn't reckon you would? By afternoon, the wind picked up again. Jackson went to check the traps lower down the creek, half expecting to find nothing but snow. The trail felt uneasy, too still, as though the woods were holding their breath. Once, he thought he heard a horse snort somewhere beyond the pines, but when he turned, there was only silence and falling flakes. He returned early, rifle over his shoulder, 2 rabbits swinging from his belt. Emilia had the fire blazing when he entered, and the smell of stew filled the air. She looked up from her sewing when she saw his face. You didn't find peace out there, she said quietly. No, he admitted. Something's wrong in the wind. She set aside her needle. Then we pray. Fear don't do much good otherwise. Jackson didn't answer, but when she folded her hands and bowed her head, he stayed still beside her, hat pressed to his chest. Her words were soft, but they filled the cabin. Lord, we're small things in a hard world, but you see us. Keep harm from our door and give courage where it's needed. When she finished, the silence that followed felt less empty. Jackson stirred the pot and changed the subject. You made this smell good enough to wake the dead. She smiled faintly. It's just rabbit stew. They ate, and for a while the unease faded. But when night fell and the wind rattled the shutters, Jackson took his rifle and set it by his bedroll near the door. Expecting trouble? Emilia asked. Always best to be ready for it, he replied. She hesitated, then reached across the table. Whatever happens, I trust you. The words hit him deeper than he let on. He gave a slow nod, staring into the fire. Then I'll make sure that trust ain't misplaced. Just before dawn, Jackson woke to a sound, the creak of wood outside. He sat up fast, listening. Another creak, then a faint jingle, like metal against saddle leather. He eased to his feet and unbarred the door, opening it a crack. Outside, snow reflected the moonlight in silver patches. Down the slope, 3 shadowy figures moved between the pines, leading horses. Jackson's gut clenched. They weren't passing travelers. They were watching. He shut the door quietly and turned. Emilia was sitting up on the cot, clutching the blanket. What is it? Men, he said. 3 of them. They're watching the cabin. Her breath caught. Silas? Could be. I can't tell yet. But they'll come back by daylight. Best we act like we don't know. What'll you do? He checked his rifle, loading a fresh round. Wait. Emilia swallowed hard, then reached for her Bible. Then I'll pray while you wait. He managed a faint smile. That'll do more good than you think. The next morning dawned clear and bright. the kind of morning that looked harmless but carried a sharp edge. Jackson stepped outside as though nothing were wrong, chopping wood and stacking it by the wall. His movements were easy, but his eyes scanned the tree line constantly. No figures appeared, but he knew they were out there, waiting, watching. Inside, Amelia baked cornbread and pretended calm. Every now and then, she peeked through the curtain, whispering under her breath. Jackson didn't ask what she said, but he suspected her prayers were specific. By noon, the valley was still again. No tracks, no riders in sight. Jackson's instincts told him it wasn't over. He stepped inside and said, "They'll come soon, maybe tomorrow, maybe with a badge." "Badge?" she echoed. "Lawmen or men pretending to be," he said grimly. "And they'll have questions. Best we get your story straight." She straightened her shoulders. "The truth will do." He looked at her a long moment, then nodded. "Truth'll have to be enough." As dusk settled, he poured them both coffee and stared into the fire. "Whatever comes, you don't open that door unless I say." "I understand." They sat there, quiet but not afraid. Two souls braced against whatever storm might come next. Outside, the first snowflakes of a new front began to fall. And somewhere beyond the ridge, 3 riders turned their horses toward the lonely cabin light. The storm clouds drifted away by morning, leaving the world still and bright. Sunlight hit the snow until it glittered like crushed glass. Jackson split firewood behind the cabin, while Amelia swept the hearth inside. The rhythm of work steadied them both, but neither spoke of the shadows that had passed through the trees the night before. Some truths could only be handled 1 hour at a time. By late morning, Jackson stacked the last of the wood by the door and paused to breathe. The air bit cold but clean. He was about to go inside when a sound broke the quiet, the jangle of tack and hooves grinding through snow. He stiffened, hand going to the rifle leaning by the door. 3 riders came up the trail. The one in front wore a long coat and a tin badge that caught the light. Sheriff Malden. Jackson had seen him once or twice in town years back, before he quit the world of men. A thick man, all jaw and mustache, with eyes that measured profit faster than justice. 2 deputies trailed behind him, younger and meaner looking. "Stay inside," Jackson murmured through the doorway. Amelia froze mid-step, broom in hand. "Who is it?" she whispered. "Lawmen, or they call themselves that," he said. "Keep still. Let me talk." He stepped off the porch and closed the door behind him. The riders drew up close, snow creaking under their horses' hooves. The sheriff tipped his hat without warmth. "Mornin', Turner," he said. "Ain't seen you down in Silver Bluff in a while." "Had no reason to come," Jackson answered evenly. "A man's got all he needs up here." The sheriff's grin didn't reach his eyes. "That so? Well, now you got a reason. Word reached town you're harboring a woman. Name's Amelia Hensley." Jackson's jaw tightened. "You've been talking to someone named Vane, then?" Malden's eyebrows rose, amused. "So you know him?" "Says the lady ran off with his money. Claims she's touched in the head. I got orders to bring her in and return what's his." Jackson's eyes went hard. "Ain't no money here, Sheriff. Only a half-frozen woman I near pulled from death. She's done no wrong." The sheriff swung down from his horse, boots sinking deep in the snow. "You don't get to decide that. Law does." Jackson's voice stayed low. "If law meant something, maybe I'd agree. But I seen the kind of law you carry." The deputies shifted uneasily. Malden's grin turned mean. "Don't test me, Turner. I could haul you both down to town and sort it out in the cells." Jackson didn't move, but his rifle leaned close at the wall. "You can try, but no one's taking her till spring. She's weak. She'll die on that trail. Malden spat into the snow. "That ain't my concern. Hand her over." Inside the cabin, Amelia pressed a hand over her mouth, heart pounding. Through a crack in the shutters, she saw the sheriff's gloved hand rest on his revolver. She whispered, "Lord, give him wisdom. Don't let anger lead." Outside, Jackson's calm voice cut through the cold. "You come any closer to that door, Sheriff, and you'll find this valley colder than you expected." One deputy drew half his pistol before Malden barked, "Hold it, Pete. Not here." He turned back to Jackson. "You think you're protecting her, but you're just making things worse. That fella Vane's rich. He'll have the papers saying she's his betrothed and a thief to boot. You'll end up on the wrong side of every judge west of Denver." Jackson didn't blink. "I've been on the wrong side of men before. Don't much mind it." Malden studied him for a moment, jaw flexing. "You got grit, Turner. Shame it's wasted on trash." The insult hit like a slap, but Jackson's voice stayed steady. "You done here?" The sheriff smiled thinly. "For now, I'll be back with a warrant. Then we'll see what you got to say when a badge ain't the only thing standing between you and rope." He climbed back on his horse, pulling the reins hard. Snow sprayed behind them as the riders turned and vanished down the trail. Their laughter carried faintly on the wind. Jackson watched them until the sound was gone, then went inside. Amelia stood by the window, face pale. "They'll come back," she whispered. "I know," he said, setting the rifle down. "And next time, they'll bring lies to go with their guns." She sank into the chair, hands trembling. "I never took his money. I swear before heaven I didn't." Jackson crouched beside her, meeting her eyes. "I know that. I don't need proof." Tears slipped down her cheeks, quiet as melted snow. "He'll ruin you if you keep me here." "Let him try," Jackson said softly. "You ain't the first soul I've seen bullied by men who think money makes them right. You're staying here till I say otherwise." She pressed a hand to his sleeve. "Why would you risk yourself for me?" He hesitated, then spoke the truth. "'Cause I failed someone once, ain't doing it again." She didn't ask who. She didn't need to. Her hand lingered, then dropped. "Then may God keep you safe, Mr. Turner, and me brave." That night, the wind rose again. Jackson barred the door and checked the rifle twice. Amelia prayed softly by the fire, words too low to catch. When she finished, she reached into her satchel and pulled out a small locket, the one Jackson had found on her that first night. She turned it in her hands before opening it. Inside was a tiny daguerreotype of a man and woman, older, kind-faced. "My parents," she said quietly. "Pa gave this to me when I left. Said no matter where I went, God went with me." Jackson studied the picture. "Good folks?" "The best," she said, closing the locket. "Pa used to tell me, 'Decency's a lantern, Amelia. Don't set it down when the night gets mean.'" He looked into the fire, its orange light painting his face. "He raised you right." Amelia smiled faintly. "He tried. Mama said kindness is just courage with gentle hands." Jackson nodded, the words sitting heavy but good in his heart. "That's a truth the world forgets too easy." They sat in silence a long time. Outside, the snow hissed softly against the roof, and the forest murmured like a distant sea. Later, when Jackson lay on his bedroll, he stared at the ceiling beams and thought about the sheriff's eyes. Cold, greedy, full of something worse than hatred. He thought of Silas Vane's name and the way Amelia had said it, half whisper, half wound. The cabin walls had heard plenty of ghosts before, but tonight they seemed to listen for trouble. He closed his eyes and prayed in the way a lonely man prays, quiet, uncertain, but real. "Lord," he murmured, Don't let her pay for other folks' sins, and if it comes to fightin', let me stand right." Morning dawned bright, but uneasy. Jackson saddled Jasper early. "I'll ride down to the ridge," he said. "See if they left sign or doubled back." Amelia poured him coffee, hands steady now. "Be careful." He gave a small nod, then paused at the door. "You keep the rifle close. Don't open to no one but me." "I'll be ready," she said. He stepped out into the brittle cold. The trail glimmered ahead, the snow crunching underfoot. He followed it down the ridge until he saw what he feared. New hoof prints, circling, not leaving. They'd camped nearby, waiting. He stood still for a long moment, then turned back toward the cabin, his mind set firm. If the law had turned crooked, then justice would have to come from someplace higher. Twilight came early that evening, spreading blue shadows over the valley. Jackson returned to the cabin silent and weary, his coat dusted with frost and his rifle strapped across his back. Amelia looked up from the hearth where she was stirring stew and saw the set of his jaw. She didn't need to ask what he'd found. "They're still out there," she said quietly. He nodded. "Camped a mile off the ridge. Sheriff and his men ain't gone far. Just waitin'." She stirred the pot once more, slow and thoughtful. "You think they'll come tonight?" "No," he said, easing his rifle against the wall. "They'll wait for daylight when they can ride in looking official." "And what will you do then?" He glanced toward the fire. "Tell the truth. If that don't work, I'll do what's right instead." The words hung heavy between them. Amelia ladled stew into bowls, setting one before him. "Then eat while you can," she said softly. "A body fights better when it's warm." Jackson gave a faint smile and took the bowl. "You've got more sense than half the men I ever met." "I just have more practice worryin'," she said, sitting across from him. "Worry teaches patience." They ate in near silence, the crackle of the fire filling the pauses. When they were done, Jackson washed the dishes while Amelia sat near the flames, her Bible open on her knees. The golden light danced over her face, softening the worry in her eyes. After a long while, she spoke. "I reckon I owe you the truth of everything, before others tell it their way." Jackson glanced back at her. "You don't owe me nothing." "I do," she insisted gently. "If the lawmen come again, they'll twist it all. I'd rather you heard it straight." He dried his hands and sat down across from her, the flames between them. She looked into the fire as she spoke, her voice steady but quiet. "I came west because I had no place left back home. My pa died the winter before last. Cholera. Mama followed him before spring thawed. The farm went to debt. I'd spent my life looking after others, and when they were gone, I reckoned the Lord meant for me to start again." Jackson listened without interrupting. "I answered an advertisement for a mail-order bride," she continued. "Silas Vane wrote polite at first, promised a home, a church nearby, decent land. I thought maybe I'd be of use again. But when I reached his ranch near the plains, he wasn't the man he claimed." She swallowed hard, voice trembling but firm. "He was cruel, Mr. Turner. Not just temper, but pride. He said a woman my size should be grateful for any man's attention. When I told him no, when I wouldn't let him touch me before vows, he struck me, called me worthless. The next day, he told the escort to leave me behind while I was sick, promised to send for me later. They never did." Jackson's hands clenched into fists. "He beat you?" "One strike," she said quietly. "Enough to learn what he'd be as a husband." The fire popped, sending a shower of sparks up the chimney. Jackson's voice was low. "You didn't deserve that." "I know that now," she said, staring at the flames. "But when the sheriff came yesterday and said I'd stolen from him, I almost believed it myself. Like maybe I'd done wrong for wanting to live free of him. Jackson shook his head slowly. Evil men make folks question their own goodness. That's their trick. She smiled faintly, eyes glistening. You speak like a preacher when you're angry. He huffed. My pa was one, or tried to be when he wasn't drinking. I learned early what words sound right even when they come from the wrong heart. They fell into a long silence. Outside, the wind howled through the chimney, and the timbers groaned like a tired old soul. Jackson added another log to the fire. Amelia's hands trembled as she held them toward the warmth. Mr. Turner, she said softly, you risked your life for a stranger. Why? He hesitated. The question hit deeper than he liked. Because I failed once before. She waited, patient as mountain stone. He stared into the flames. My wife, Hannah, she took sick. Fever hit fast. I rode for the doctor, but the snow caught me. By the time I got back, she was gone. I buried her up the ridge. Couldn't bring myself to leave, but couldn't bear to live either. Been half dead since, until you knocked on my door without knocking. Amelia's voice was gentle. You didn't fail her. You tried. He shook his head. Try and don't change what's in the ground. She looked at him with quiet strength. Then maybe God sent you another chance to try again, and not to fail this time. He met her gaze, firelight flickering between them. For a moment, the room felt warmer, alive with something new, a fragile hope neither dared name. The fire popped again, breaking the spell. Amelia drew a breath and said, May I show you something? Jackson nodded. She unfastened her locket, opened it, and held it out. Inside was a small folded slip of paper beneath the photograph. She unfolded it carefully. This was written by the missionary woman who baptized me as a child, she said. When she left Kansas, she told me, You'll forget my face someday, but remember this verse. She handed the note to him. In neat, faded ink, it read, The wilderness and the solitary place shall be glad for them, and the desert shall rejoice and blossom as the rose. Jackson read it twice, the words striking something deep and tender. That's Isaiah, he murmured. She nodded. It means no land is too dry for God to make bloom again, not even a heart. He handed it back to her slowly. You still believe that? I do, she said. Some days harder than others. But when you found me in that wagon, I believed it again. Jackson's throat tightened. He looked away, pretending to stir the fire. Guess maybe I believe it too. The quiet that followed was thick but gentle. The kind that settles between two people who have shared more truth than they meant to. Finally, Amelia stood, wrapped her shawl tighter, and said, I'll see to the woodpile before the snow sets again. I'll go with you, Jackson said automatically. She smiled faintly. I can carry a log, Mr. Turner. He didn't argue, but followed her out anyway. The air bit cold and sharp. The mountains glowed purple in the dying light. Together they hauled a few armloads of wood to the porch, their breath rising like smoke. When they finished, Amelia brushed snow from her sleeves and looked at the horizon. The world looks peaceful when it's frozen, she said. It lies well, Jackson answered. Back inside, they warmed themselves by the fire once more. Night crept in through the cracks. Jackson poured 2 cups of coffee, set one before her, and said quietly, You told me your truth. Reckon I'll tell you mine? Amelia tilted her head. Didn't you already? Not all of it. He took a deep breath. When Hannah died, I stopped praying. Figured God quit listening. But the night I found you in that wagon, I prayed again. Didn't even mean to. Just came out. Guess part of me hoped someone would answer. She smiled softly, tears bright in the firelight. Then maybe he did. They drank their coffee in silence, the kind that doesn't need words. When it grew late, Jackson laid out his bedroll by the door, as always. Amelia tucked herself beneath the quilt, her Bible on the small shelf beside her. Before blowing out the lamp, she said, "Good night, Mr. Turner." He looked toward the window, where the moonlight spilled across the floor like silver water. "Good night, Miss Hensley." As the fire dimmed, the light traced soft patterns across the cabin walls. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees. Inside, two hearts, scarred but steady, began to thaw. And somewhere in the stillness between them, a prayer neither spoke found its way upward, quiet as smoke through a chimney. The sun broke over the ridge with pale gold light, scattering diamonds of frost across the snow. Jackson was already outside when Amelia woke, swinging an axe into a fallen log. Each strike rang sharp in the cold air. Steam rose from his breath, mingling with the scent of pine. Inside, she warmed the stove and hummed softly as she made coffee. When Jackson came in, his cheeks burned red from the cold. "Mornin'," he said, stamping snow from his boots. "Day's fair. Might stay that way." "Fair sounds mighty fine," Amelia replied with a smile. She poured him coffee. "I'll bake today if the dough will rise in this chill." "It'll rise," he said, grinning faintly. "You've got a way of coaxing life out of things thought frozen." The remark caught her breath for a moment. Before she could answer, the sound of a low whistle drifted through the trees. It was soft but clear, a tune Jackson knew too well. He froze. "That'll be Henry," he said. "Who's Henry?" Amelia asked, setting down her cup. "Friend," Jackson said, moving to the door. "Ute scout. Been trading pelts with me for years. Don't come this high less he's got reason." He stepped outside and saw a figure emerging through the pines, a tall man wrapped in a woven blanket, his dark hair tied with rawhide, long rifle slung over his shoulder. His step was easy but sure, eyes sharp as a hawk's. When he reached the clearing, he smiled faintly. "Brother Jackson?" Henry greeted, his voice deep and calm. "You still live with the bears, I see." Jackson chuckled and clasped his arm. "Ain't much else for company. You keepin' well?" "Still breathin'," Henry said. "Trade's slow. Army wants more scouts but less pay. Same story as always." Jackson nodded. "Come in. Warm yourself. Got coffee on." Henry followed him inside, ducking through the low doorway. When Amelia saw him, she rose quickly, eyes wide but not fearful. She wiped her hands on her apron and said, "Welcome, sir." Henry inclined his head politely. "You are the woman who survived the storm. I saw the wreck of that wagon last week but thought all gone to snow. I am glad I was wrong." "I'm grateful you looked," she said sincerely. "And gratefully found me." She nodded toward Jackson. Henry smiled faintly. "He has a habit of finding strays." Jackson poured coffee for him and motioned for Henry to sit. "You ain't just up here for a visit," Jackson said. Henry took a sip before answering. "No, there's talk down in Silver Bluff. A rancher, Silas Vane, sent word through the sheriff. Claims his betrothed ran off with a bag of coin." Amelia stiffened. Jackson's jaw tightened. Henry set the tin cup down gently. "He paid men to look, some mean ones. Sheriff Malden walks in his shadow." "I figured as much," Jackson said. Henry reached inside his coat and drew out a small leather pouch. "Found this on the trail below the fort. Same mark as your wagon's harness. Had your name carved inside the strap." Amelia opened it with shaking hands. Inside lay a silver hairpin and a small folded note sealed with wax. Her breath caught. "This was mine," she whispered. "Pa's handwriting." She broke the seal carefully and read, "If you find this child, remember your worth. Don't sell your heart to any man who values land above heaven." She closed her eyes, tears slipping down her cheeks. He must have tucked this away before I left. Henry gave a small nod. "Your father traded once with my people. Good man. Honest." Jackson looked between them. "That's proof enough she's no thief." Henry's gaze turned serious. "Proof won't matter to men like Vane. He bought the sheriff's loyalty. He means to make example of anyone who defies him. Word is, he's filed claim over water rights near your land, too. If he can run you off, he'll own half this valley." Jackson's hand tightened on his mug. "So it ain't just about her. It's about control." Henry nodded slowly. "Always is." Amelia spoke, voice quiet but firm. "What can we do?" Henry's eyes softened at her steadiness. "Truth told in daylight still has power. I will vouch for you when the time comes, but be ready. They will come soon." "Then we'll be ready," Jackson said. Henry smiled faintly. "I believe you." He rose to go, wrapping his blanket again. "I will send word through the trader at the fort. If soldiers come, you'll hear the signal. A whistle like a meadowlark. 3 short, 1 long." Jackson clasped his hand. "You're a good man, Henry." Henry's expression was calm, but his eyes were deep with unspoken things. "I am a man who remembers promises. Your wife once helped tend my sister's fever when the army doctor would not. I owe her memory more than thanks." Amelia looked between them softly. "Then we owe her together." Henry bowed slightly. "Walk in peace," he said, and stepped into the bright snow. Jackson and Amelia watched him vanish among the pines, his footprints already filling with drifting flakes. Inside, the cabin felt warmer, though the wind howled outside. Amelia turned to Jackson. "That man carries himself like someone who knows where he belongs." "He does," Jackson said. "Maybe one day I'll remember the same." She touched the locket at her throat. "You've done right by him, and by me." He met her gaze. "Ain't done yet?" As the day passed, Jackson sharpened his knife and checked the ammunition, while Amelia baked bread and prayed under her breath. The smell of yeast and wood smoke filled the small cabin, wrapping them in a fragile sense of calm. At sunset, they sat together at the table, sharing supper. Outside, the pines groaned under wind. Jackson looked toward the door and said, "When Henry says trouble's comin', he's never wrong. But I'll be damned if I let that sheriff drag you out of here." Amelia's eyes glowed in the firelight. "You're a good man, Mr. Turner." He looked down at his hands. "Just trying to be the man I should have been before." She reached across the table, laying her hand lightly over his. "Then you already are." For a long time, they sat like that, the silence full and steady, the fire throwing warm light on 2 people who'd stopped running from their pasts. Outside, far off in the dark, a coyote called. Inside, Faith stirred again, quiet but alive. The storms broke for good a week later, leaving the valley quiet under soft light. Meltwater trickled down from the ridges, singing faint songs in the distance. The air smelled of pine and thawing earth. Jackson leaned against the porch rail, sleeves rolled, watching the snow retreat inch by inch. Each patch of brown ground felt like hope itself showing its face again. Inside the cabin, Amelia worked at the table, rolling out dough for biscuits. Her cheeks had color now. Her laugh came easier. Jackson could hear her humming while she worked, an old hymn that matched the rhythm of her hands. The cabin no longer felt like a hollow place for ghosts. It felt lived in again, warm and true. He stepped inside and hung his coat by the door. "You been humming all morning," he said. "Don't reckon I've heard that song since I was a boy." Amelia looked up, smiling faintly. Mama used to sing it every planting season. Said it kept her hands steady." He grinned. "Then I guess we're both planting something new." She laughed softly, dusting flour from her hands. "Maybe we are." They ate their midday meal in the sunlight pouring through the window. Biscuits, wild onions Henry had left, and a bit of salted venison. The mood was lighter than it had been in months. Still, a quiet question lingered between them, unspoken but felt. After the meal, Jackson stepped outside to mend the corral fence. Emilia followed with her sewing basket, sitting on the porch step. She stitched the torn sleeve of his coat while he hammered in a loose plank. The sound of each strike echoed through the trees. "Henry said spring would bring peace," she said after a while. "You think that's true?" Jackson paused, resting his hammer against his thigh. "Peace don't come by seasons," he said. "Comes by choices, and sometimes by what we're willing to let go." She nodded slowly. "You still carry her, don't you? Your Hannah?" His eyes softened. "Every day. But lately." He looked toward the horizon where sunlight spread over the snowfields. "Lately it feels less like carrying and more like remembering. There's a difference." Emilia folded the finished sleeve neatly in her lap. "I think she'd be glad to see how you've kept this place alive." He smiled quietly. Maybe she'd be glad to see someone else helped do it. That made her blush. She turned back to her sewing, pretending to fix a loose thread that didn't exist. "Well," she said, "no woman wants to see a man freeze for lack of biscuits." Jackson chuckled low. "That so? Then I owe you my hide." They worked in companionable silence for a long time. The air was mild, birds beginning to return. Every sound felt like the start of something good. When the sun dipped lower, Emilia went inside to prepare supper. Jackson followed after, bringing in kindling. He stopped just inside the doorway, watching her move about the kitchen space. She moved with quiet confidence now, unafraid, unhurried. He realized, not for the first time, how her presence filled the emptiness he'd built around himself. "You've made this place your own," he said. Emilia glanced back. "I only tended what was already good. You just forgot to see it." He smiled softly. "Reckon that's true?" She poured stew into 2 bowls and motioned for him to sit. As they ate, the conversation turned to lighter things. The first blooms that would come, whether the high creek would rise too high, how Henry might visit again once the trails cleared. They spoke like neighbors planning for the future, not 2 survivors waiting for danger. When the dishes were washed and set aside, Emilia brought her Bible to the table. "Would you like to read with me tonight?" she asked gently. "Just a verse or 2. Jackson hesitated. "Ain't sure I remember how." "Then I'll help," she said. She opened to Isaiah, the same passage she'd shown him before. "Here, the wilderness and the solitary place shall be glad for them. Go on." He read the next line aloud, voice low and rough from disuse. "And the desert shall rejoice and blossom as the rose." His voice cracked a little at the end. Emilia's eyes softened. "You see," she said quietly, "you ain't forgotten how." He looked down at the page. "Guess I just needed a reason to start again." The fire flickered low between them, throwing shadows across the walls. Outside, the wind carried the scent of melting pine needles. A feeling settled in the room. Not excitement, not fear, but peace. After a long silence, Jackson said, "When this snow clears, we'll have to head into town. Sheriff will come again. Best we face him with truth before he brings trouble here." Emilia nodded, though worry crossed her face. "Do you think he'll listen?" "I think the truth don't always win easy," he said, "but it's the only thing worth standing for." She reached across the table, her hand finding his. Then we'll stand together." He didn't pull away. Her hand was warm, steady, full of life. He realized how long it had been since another person had touched him without pity or demand. Just trust. The moment stretched. Then she smiled gently and withdrew, rising to stir the fire. "You'll catch cold sitting that close to the draft," she teased lightly, breaking the heaviness. He smiled too, grateful. "Bossy woman." "A live woman," she replied, "and thankful for it." They shared a laugh that sounded strange at first, then easy. When she settled back onto the cot, Jackson sat a while longer by the fire. The crackle of wood filled the quiet, mingled with her steady breathing as she drifted toward sleep. He looked around the cabin, the patched curtains, the blue quilt, the neat stack of wood, the faint smell of bread cooling on the shelf, and realized something had changed. The air no longer felt thick with grief. The space no longer echoed like a tomb. He whispered into the flickering light, "You were right, Hannah. There's still good left." The wind outside sighed through the trees like an answer. He rose, stirred the embers, and looked toward Emilia. She slept soundly, face peaceful beneath the quilt. A faint smile touched his lips. "Spring's comin'," he murmured, "and I reckon it's about time." He blew out the lamp. The last glow of the fire painted the room in soft gold as the mountains outside settled into night. For the first time since the snows began, Jackson Turner lay down, knowing tomorrow might bring more than survival. It might bring the start of living again. Dawn came thin and colorless, a pale ribbon along the eastern ridge. Frost glazed the corral rails. The creek whispered under crusted ice. Not yet free. Not yet bound. Jackson sat on the porch step, lacing his boots, thinking about the trip to town he and Emilia had promised to make. He planned to go peaceable and early, face the sheriff in daylight, let truth strike while tempers were cool. Inside, Emilia stirred the fire and set the coffee pot to burble. The cabin smelled like smoke, iron, and hope. Then came the knock. It wasn't a polite rapping. It was the heavy, flat-handed sound of men who owned the hour and meant to take more. Before Jackson could rise, a voice called through the door, full of winter and swagger. "Open up! Sheriff's business!" Emilia's eyes found Jackson's. He nodded once. She barred the door and moved behind him, lips parted but steady. Jackson lifted the bar himself, slow and calm, and pulled the door wide. Sheriff Malden stood on the threshold with 2 deputies crowding his shoulders. Frost rimed their mustaches. Their horses snorted steam on the trail behind. The sheriff wore his long coat open, badge bright, smile brighter. "Mornin', Turner," he said, like they were old friends. "Got papers now." He thrust a folded document forward. Jackson didn't take it. "State your business plain." Malden's smile thinned. "By order of Judge Elkins, Silver Bluff District, I'm to apprehend one Jackson Turner for unlawful detaining of a woman and obstructing an officer, and I'm to return said woman, Emilia Hensley, to the custody of her lawful betrothed, Mr. Silas Vane, pending inquiry into theft." Emilia stepped into view. "I am not his property," she said, voice clear. "I stole nothing." Malden's gaze slid over her, cold and unkind. "Ma'am, your feelings don't change the law." Jackson planted his boots. "No one leaves this house frozen. She's not trail strong yet." "Then she can ride in the wagon," Malden said. He tipped his head at his men. "Pete, Hal." "Hold," Jackson said, palm raised. "You want me, take me. She stays till thaw. You drag her now, you'll answer for it before God and a judge with eyes." "Judge already signed, son." Malden flicked the paper. "Now stand aside." The deputies shifted, hands resting casual on gun belts. Inside the cabin, the coffee hissed over, spitting on the stove. Amelia pressed a hand to her throat, found the locket, steadied. Jackson looked at her and then at Malden. His voice came out even, almost gentle. "You mean to make trouble where mercy would do." "Mercy is for churches," Malden said. "This here is a badge." He lunged for the jam. Jackson took one step to block him. In the same breath, the nearest deputy jammed a shoulder through the gap. The door banged wide, cold rushing in like a flood. Amelia stumbled back as boots scraped the floorboards. "Hands!" barked Malden. Jackson didn't reach for his rifle. He let the deputies seize his arms, metal cuffs biting bone. He kept his eyes on Amelia. "Do not be afraid," he said softly. Her mouth trembled. "I won't," she lied, and then found the truth. "I'll be brave." Malden swept the cabin with a greedy glance. The neat stack of kindling, the blue quilt, the 2 tin bowls on the table, and sneered like goodness was a crime. He nodded at the deputies. "Out." They hauled Jackson into the blue brittle morning. Snow squeaked under boots. A crow flapped up from the fence line, cawing like a curse. Amelia followed to the threshold, hands clenched in her skirt. Jackson turned once on the porch, the cuffs clinking. "Bar the door after," he said. "Keep the fire high. Wait for Henry if you can." Malden smirked. "Look at that. House rules on the gallows walk." Amelia stepped forward, chin lifted. "Sir," she said to the sheriff, "if you have any scrap of decency, let him ride, not walk. He has done no wrong. He saved my life." Malden's eyes flicked to her, measuring. "You want him to ride?" He glanced at a deputy. "Put him up, and tie him good." They shoved Jackson toward a gelding and cinched a rope from his wrists to the saddle horn. The knot was cruel, meant to pinch and burn. Jackson didn't complain. He set his boot and swung up, settling like a man who'd always belonged in a saddle. The deputies mounted. Malden twisted in his own stirrups to grin at Amelia. "Pack what you like, honey. I'll send a man back for you by noon." "You'll do no such thing," she said, voice shaking and strong at once. "You have no right." Malden touched the brim of his hat, mocking. "Paper says otherwise." They started down the trail. Hooves rang on frozen ruts. Malden didn't hurry. He wanted the moment to linger, the sight of power riding away with justice bent behind. Jackson looked back once, just once. Amelia stood framed in the doorway, lamplight at her side, the quilt like a field of blue sky behind her. He put a smile in his eyes for her, the kind that said, "Endure." Then the pines closed and she was gone. The first bend took them out of sight of the cabin. The cold bit hard, settling in his cuffed wrists where skin already scuffed raw. Malden rode close, talking for his own pleasure. "You know, Turner, a man like you could have made an honest dollar working for Vane. He's got plans for this valley, rails, water, beef. Men who stand in the way of progress tend to get trampled." Jackson watched the trail. "Progress don't require cruelty." "Everything requires something," Malden said. "Land requires men with notions. Law requires men who can enforce it, and sheep require fences." "I ain't sheep," Jackson's said. "You're right," Malden answered cheerfully. "You're mutton." They reached the lower switchback where the trail narrowed. A skiff of drifted snow hid ice. The horses danced, iron shoes scraping. Malden cursed softly and slowed the line. The valley opened to the right, blue shadow falling away like folded silk. Far off, smoke lifted thin from the direction of Silver Bluff. Back at the cabin, Amelia stood still until the sound of hooves died. Then she barred the door and moved. Fear wanted to make her small. Work made her strong. She packed bread, jerky, a tin of lard, 2 blankets, needle and thread, and the letter from the missionary's widow. She took Jackson's spare gloves and his old scarf. At the stove, she boiled water and poured it in a stoneware bottle to warm her hands for the first miles. She wrote 2 lines on a scrap of paper. Gone to town. God go with me. And set it under the Bible where Henry would find it if he came. She saddled Jackson's mule. The leather creaked, familiar, honest. She fumbled the cinch once, cursed under breath, and tried again. When she led the mule to the porch, the animal bumped her shoulder like an old friend. "We're going to fetch your master," she said, voice steadying. "We'll bring him home." She paused at the threshold and looked back into the room. The blue quilt lay smoothed on the cot, the fire stacked high, the cups rinsed and nested. It looked like a home. It was a home because 2 people had dared to call it one. She put her hand on the doorframe and whispered, "Keep for us." Then she swung into the saddle and turned the mule's head to the trail. The snow bore old tracks that pointed toward town. Her breath fogged the air. The cold bit nose and cheekbones, but she set her jaw against it. She rode at a careful clip, not fast, not slow. The miles unrolled in white and shadow. Jays flashed blue over alder. A fox crossed ahead, pausing to stare, then vanished in grass that would be green soon enough. At the ridge overlook, she reined in and scanned the valley. Nothing moved but wind. Far down, a thin line cut across a drift where 3 riders had passed. She pressed on, humming to keep her courage from rattling. The hymn came of its own accord, the planting song her mother used to sing, "Great is thy faithfulness." The words warmed her better than the scarf. By late morning she reached the fork where the fort road split from the town road. Wagon ruts scored the snow here, frozen hard. She chose the town road. Truth lived in daylight. Men lied in camps. The sun climbed to a pale height and began to lean. Her fingers ached. She flexed them and prayed for steady. When the roofs of Silver Bluff finally showed, low shapes along the frozen river, she let out a breath she didn't know she'd held since dawn. A church bell clanged once, noon late. Smoke rose from chimneys, brown and blue. Somewhere a hammer rang on an anvil. She rode straight for the jail. 2 boys loitered under the eaves, trading marbles in mittened hands. They fell silent when she swung down, skirts brushing snow. She tied the mule and squared her shoulders. Inside, the air smelled of coal and iron and men who'd stopped listening to themselves. Deputy Pete looked up from a ledger, bored until he wasn't. "Help you, ma'am?" "I've come for a prisoner," Amelia said. "Jackson Turner." The deputy's smirk tried to stick. Her eyes scraped it off. "You kin?" he asked. "I am the woman you're misusing the law to harm," she said, "and I am the one who will speak in court." He blinked, sat straighter, then glanced toward the back cell. Somewhere behind the wall came the clink of chain and the scrape of a boot heel against stone. Amelia's heart leaped and steadied at once. "Sheriff ain't here," Pete said, finding swagger again. "He'll be back after he shows a paper to the judge." "Good," she answered. "I'll see the judge first." "You can't walk in there and—" "I can," she said, every syllable clean. "And I will." She turned on her heel and stepped back into the bright day. Snow powdered underfoot. The church bell tolled a single long note that hung in the air like a promise. She faced the courthouse steps and started up, feeling each plank under her boots like a rung of faith. Behind her, in a quiet cell, a man lifted his head and smiled without seeing. Ahead of her, on a bench of oiled wood, A weary judge rubbed his eyes and looked up as the door opened. "Your Honor," Amelia said, voice ringing like a clear creek, "I have come to speak the truth." The judge looked weary but kind as Amelia stood before him, snow still clinging to her cloak. "Your Honor," she said, "I've come to clear an innocent man." Her voice trembled once, then steadied. The courtroom murmured when she told of the storm, the rescue, and the sheriff's lies. Judge Alden Pierce listened hard, eyes narrowing as truth took root. When she showed Henry's letter, the proof of Silas Vane's deceit, the judge's gavel struck loud. "Release Turner," he ordered, "and bring Vane here in irons if justice still means anything in this town." Minutes later, Jackson stumbled into the light, bruised but free. Amelia ran to him, her face breaking into tears and laughter all at once. He caught her close, whispering, "Told you truth wins, even if it limps?" She smiled through tears. "Then let's walk it home." By afternoon, the courthouse filled to bursting. Silas Vane swaggered in, clean-shaven and smug, but the crowd turned cold when Amelia took the stand. Her voice shook only once as she told her story. The storm, the cruelty, the false promise of marriage. Henry stepped forward next, laying the missionary's letter on the judge's desk like scripture itself. Silas lunged to protest, but the judge's gavel thundered. "Silence!" he roared. The sheriff's face drained, white as Henry revealed the bribery he'd witnessed. Every lie unraveled faster than a torn rope. When the verdict came, innocent, the crowd rose cheering. Silas was led away in irons, his name broken as his pride. Jackson turned to Amelia, hat pressed to his chest. "You did it," he whispered. She smiled through tears. "No, we did." The judge nodded once. "Truth rides slow, but it never tires." The courthouse emptied under a sky turning gold. Sheriff Malden's badge was stripped from his coat, and Silas Vane sat cuffed beside the jail door, face gray with defeat. The judge's words still rang through the air. "Justice stands even in small places." Amelia waited at the steps until Jackson came out, hat in hand, wrists still bruised but free. He stopped when he saw her. Neither spoke for a moment. Then she ran to him. He caught her, holding her tight enough to stop the shaking in them both. Henry tipped his hat, smiling. "Looks like the snow broke for good." Jackson turned to Amelia, voice soft. "You ready to go home?" She nodded, tears bright as sunlight on thawed ice. "Home sounds like heaven." They rode out of Silver Bluff together, two shadows merging into the long light of evening. Spring bloomed in the valley, soft and sure. Jackson repaired the cabin porch while Amelia planted herbs beside the wall. Children from the burned railroad camp wandered by, thin and curious. She fed them stew, teaching one boy to mend a torn sleeve. Jackson watched from the doorway, heart easing with every laugh. When Henry returned, he brought a preacher and a smile. Beneath the pines, the couple spoke simple vows, hands trembling but sure. The children tossed pine needles instead of petals. That evening, lamplight filled the cabin. Jackson whispered, "You've made this place whole again." Amelia smiled. "No, we did." Summer warmed the high valley, turning meadows green and bright. Amelia's garden bloomed beside the cabin, full of herbs, beans, and wildflowers. Children's laughter drifted from the porch where she taught them their letters. Jackson returned from hunting at dusk, pausing to watch her through the open door. Inside, lamplight painted her face soft and golden. She looked up and smiled. "You're late," she teased. He grinned. "Had to thank the Lord for all this before coming home." She rose, met him by the hearth, and he whispered, "Went hunting for meat, came home with a miracle." Together they prayed, their cabin glowing like a lantern against the mountains. Thanks for tuning in. These stories remind us that life is more than headlines. It's about heartlines. Subscribe if you want more moments that make you pause, feel, and reflect.